Welcome to this channel today. We embark on a deep dive into the extraordinary history of one of Africa's greatest civilizations, the Great Zimbabwe. From its awe-inspiring architecture to its complex trade networks and profound cultural legacy, this kingdom left an indelible mark on history. This 2-hour journey will uncover the rise, peak, and eventual decline of Great Zimbabwe, examining its environmental, political, and economic factors, while also revealing how its legacy continues to shape African and global identity today. As you listen, prepare to discover not just a civilization, but a symbol of Africa's untold resilience and ingenuity. So, sit back, relax, and let's uncover the history of Great Zimbabwe, one of the most magnificent African empires that shaped the course of history. The history of the Great Zimbabwe civilization begins with the rise of the Bantu-speaking people who migrated from the north into the southern regions of Africa over a period that stretched from around 1000 BCE to 1000 CE. This migration was part of a larger movement of groups that spread agriculture, ironworking, and new cultural traditions across sub-Saharan Africa. The Bantu-speaking peoples, whose ancestors would eventually form the core of what we now understand as the Shona people, settled in various regions of what is today Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique. The early Bantu settlers established agricultural communities based on crops like millet, sorghum, and later, maize, which they cultivated using iron tools they forged. As they mastered farming techniques, these early settlers began to form more permanent villages and slowly grew into larger communities. Their ability to work iron and copper helped them develop more efficient tools and weapons, essential for both farming and trade. This technological advance allowed them to build settlements that were more durable and able to support larger populations. By around the 5th century CE, these Bantu-speaking groups had established fortified villages, many of which were centered around local trade routes and strategic locations. Their social structures were complex, with chiefs and local rulers exerting control over vast stretches of land. These rulers, often known as Mambo, would later play an essential role in the development of Great Zimbabwe. However, at this stage, the region was primarily composed of smaller tribal communities with no unified state structure. This would change significantly over the centuries as the people of Great Zimbabwe came into contact with other African cultures, such as those from the Indian Ocean trade routes and other parts of Africa. The rise of Great Zimbabwe as a prominent civilization can be traced back to the 11th century, a time when the region saw a massive shift in both economic and cultural power. The population grew, and with it, so did the significance of the Great Zimbabwe site. By the 12th century, the area had become a major trading center and was home to a growing urban population. It was during this period that the famous stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe were first constructed, marking a new chapter in the history of this once small agricultural society. Great Zimbabwe's location on the southeastern plateau of Africa played a significant role in its development as a regional power. The site offered easy access to key trade routes, which linked the interior of Africa with the coast, allowing the people of Great Zimbabwe to engage in commerce with traders from as far as Arabia, India, and China. The growth of this trade, combined with the development of advanced agricultural techniques and the rise of powerful rulers, would soon propel the civilization into one of the most fascinating and enduring empires in African history. The Great Zimbabwe civilization flourished between the 12th and 15th centuries, largely due to its strategic position along important trade routes. The kingdom became a central hub for the exchange of goods, not just within Africa, but also with distant regions, making it one of the most important trading empires of medieval Africa. The kingdom's wealth was drawn from the commodities that flowed through its markets, including gold, ivory, and other precious materials. Gold played a particularly significant role in the rise of Great Zimbabwe. The region's rich gold mines, particularly in the area around the Zambezi River and the Limpopo River, provided a steady flow of wealth into the kingdom. Gold was highly sought after by traders from the Arabian Peninsula, India, and China, who exchanged it for valuable goods such as textiles, pottery, and beads. This trade not only brought wealth to the rulers of Great Zimbabwe, but also connected them to a global network of commerce that spanned across the Indian Ocean. In addition to gold, Great Zimbabwe was known for its ivory trade. The kingdom was strategically positioned along the path of migrating elephant herds, and the ivory obtained from these animals became an essential commodity for international trade. Ivory, highly prized in both African and Eastern markets, was used for creating intricate carvings, jewelry, and other decorative items. The people of Great Zimbabwe did not simply rely on trade to boost their economy. They also developed a highly organized system of agriculture that supported both the urban population and the large numbers of laborers who worked in the mines and on the trade routes. The fertile land around the kingdom supported the cultivation of crops such as maize, millet, and wheat, while cattle farming remained an important part of the society's way of life. The production of food and animal products also played a key role in the exchange networks, with surplus goods being exchanged for imported luxuries and finished products. This trade network also enabled the people of Great Zimbabwe to acquire technologies and knowledge from other regions. For example, their construction techniques were heavily influenced by Arab and Swahili traders who had contact with the city's growing urban centers. The architectural marvels of Great Zimbabwe, including the Great Enclosure and the Hill Complex, were built using dry stone construction techniques that required no mortar but relied on precise stone placement. This engineering innovation became one of the defining features of the civilization. As Great Zimbabwe grew in power and influence, it became a center of culture, art, and intellectual exchange. The influx of goods from distant lands helped stimulate artistic and cultural developments, including intricate beadwork, pottery, and textiles. These items were not just for practical use. They were also symbols of status and prestige within the society. The leaders of Great Zimbabwe were known for their luxurious lifestyles and the elaborate stone buildings that reflected their wealth and power. As Great Zimbabwe developed, so did its complex social structure. The kingdom was led by a powerful ruler, known as the Mambo, who exercised both political and religious authority. The Mambo was considered to be the divine ruler, believed to have a direct connection to the gods. This divine connection reinforced the ruler's power, as the people of Great Zimbabwe were expected to view their king not only as a political leader, but also as a spiritual figure who mediated between the gods and the people. The Mambo was not the sole ruler in Great Zimbabwe, however. Beneath the Mambo were a series of chiefs and local leaders who governed smaller regions within the kingdom. These leaders, known as Vizimba, managed their communities with a certain degree of autonomy, but remained loyal to the Mambo. The Vizimba, in turn, were supported by a network of counselors, warriors, priests, and other advisors who played crucial roles in the kingdom's governance. In addition to the ruling class, Great Zimbabwe had a diverse population of artisans, farmers, traders, and laborers who contributed to the kingdom's economy and society. The artisans, for example, were responsible for crafting the intricate jewelry, pottery, and sculptures that became symbols of wealth and power. These artisans were skilled in working with various materials, including ivory, wood, and clay. Their work was highly valued, not just for its artistic merit, but also as a status symbol for the elite class. The farmers, who formed the backbone of the kingdom's economy, worked the fertile lands surrounding Great Zimbabwe. They cultivated a variety of crops, including maize, millet, and sorghum, which were essential for feeding the growing population. Livestock, particularly cattle, played a key role in both the agricultural and social systems. Cattle were used as a form of wealth and as a means of exchange, with the number of cattle a person owned serving as an indicator of their social standing. Trade played a significant role in shaping the society of Great Zimbabwe, as it brought wealth and new ideas into the kingdom. Traders from distant lands, especially from the Indian Ocean region, brought valuable goods such as beads, textiles, and pottery, which were highly sought after by the people of Great Zimbabwe. These goods were used not just for practical purposes, but also as symbols of status and prestige. The wealth generated by trade also allowed the Mambo and other elite members of society to build monumental stone structures that reflected their power and influence. The Great Enclosure and the Hill Complex are prime examples of the kingdom's architectural achievements. These structures, built without the use of mortar, are a testament to the advanced engineering skills of the people of Great Zimbabwe. During the medieval period, the Indian Ocean became a major conduit for trade between Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, India, and even as far as China. The coastal city-states along East Africa, particularly the Swahili coast, developed powerful trading networks that connected the interior of Africa with distant lands. Great Zimbabwe was situated just inland from the coast, and although it did not have direct access to the ocean, its strategic location allowed it to benefit greatly from these maritime trade routes. The people of Great Zimbabwe were part of a complex network of traders who exchanged goods with the Swahili city-states along the coast, such as Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar. These city-states acted as intermediaries between the interior of Africa and traders from the Middle East and Asia. By the 12th century, Great Zimbabwe had become a central hub for the flow of luxury goods from the interior to the coast and vice versa. The kingdom's strategic position, with access to vital trade routes that connected the Indian Ocean world to the African interior, enabled Great Zimbabwe to accumulate significant wealth through trade. The flow of goods included valuable items such as gold, ivory, and copper, which were in high demand along the coast and beyond. The Indian Ocean trade also brought foreign goods to Great Zimbabwe, including pottery, glass beads, and textiles. These goods were highly prized by the elite, who used them not just for personal enjoyment, but also as symbols of status and wealth. The elite of Great Zimbabwe, including the Mambo and his court, were able to showcase their power and prestige through the possession of these imported items. The role of the Indian Ocean trade was not just economic, but also cultural. As goods and people moved across these vast trade networks, so too did ideas and cultural practices. Swahili culture, which blended African, Arab, and Persian influences, began to permeate the interior of Africa, reaching even as far as Great Zimbabwe. The people of the kingdom adopted certain aspects of Swahili culture, including architectural influences. This influence is visible in the construction of the monumental stone structures that became the hallmark of Great Zimbabwe. The contact with foreign traders also had a profound effect on the kingdom's elite, who became more cosmopolitan in their tastes and interests. The Mambo and his court, for example, would have been exposed to the art, literature, and religious ideas of the Islamic world, as well as to the luxury goods produced in India and China. This exposure to diverse cultures further strengthened the position of Great Zimbabwe as a powerful center of trade and culture in medieval Africa. By the 12th century, Great Zimbabwe had become a central hub for the flow of luxury goods from the interior to the coast and vice versa. The kingdom's strategic position, with access to vital trade routes that connected the Indian Ocean world to the African interior, enabled Great Zimbabwe to accumulate significant wealth through trade. The flow of goods included valuable items such as gold, ivory, and copper, which were in high demand along the coast and beyond. The Indian Ocean trade also brought foreign goods to Great Zimbabwe, including pottery, glass beads, and textiles. These goods were highly prized by the elite, who used them not just for personal enjoyment, but also as symbols of status and wealth. The elite of Great Zimbabwe, including the Mambo and his court, were able to showcase their power and prestige through the possession of these imported items. The role of the Indian Ocean trade was not just economic, but also cultural. As goods and people moved across these vast trade networks, so too did ideas and cultural practices. Swahili culture, which blended African, Arab, and Persian influences, began to permeate the interior of Africa, reaching even as far as Great Zimbabwe. The people of the kingdom adopted certain aspects of Swahili culture, including architectural influences. This influence is visible in the construction of the monumental stone structures that became the hallmark of Great Zimbabwe. The contact with foreign traders also had a profound effect on the kingdom's elite, who became more cosmopolitan in their tastes and interests. The Mambo and his court, for example, would have been exposed to the art, literature, and religious ideas of the Islamic world, as well as to the luxury goods produced in India and China. This exposure to diverse cultures further strengthened the position of Great Zimbabwe as a powerful center of trade and culture in medieval Africa. One of the most remarkable aspects of Great Zimbabwe is its architectural heritage, which continues to astonish historians and archaeologists. The kingdom is renowned for its large, complex stone ruins, which include the Great Enclosure, the hill complex, and numerous smaller structures spread throughout the site. These stone buildings were constructed without the use of mortar, a technique known as dry stone construction, which required an exceptional level of skill and precision. The Great Enclosure, the largest and most famous of the stone structures, is particularly impressive. This massive circular wall, with a diameter of nearly 250 meters, is one of the most iconic symbols of Great Zimbabwe. It was built with enormous granite blocks that were carefully cut and fitted together to form a solid, enduring structure. The purpose of the Great Enclosure remains somewhat mysterious, but is believed to have served as a royal residence or ceremonial site. The walls of the Great Enclosure are adorned with intricate patterns and architectural features, including conical towers, which may have symbolized the power and divine right of the ruler. The hill complex, another key feature of the site, is situated on a hilltop and is thought to have been a religious and political center. The hill complex is also constructed from large blocks of granite, carefully arranged without mortar. It contains a number of smaller buildings, including a series of terraces and platforms, which may have been used for ritual purposes. The hill complex's location, atop a hill with panoramic views of the surrounding region, underscores its importance as both a political and spiritual center. The construction of these monumental structures required significant human labor and organization. It is likely that a large number of laborers, including skilled stone masons and general workers, were employed in the construction of the walls, towers, and buildings. These laborers may have been drawn from the local population as well as from conquered territories, as the kingdom expanded its influence through military conquest and alliances. The stone architecture of Great Zimbabwe not only reflects the kingdom's wealth and power, but also serves as a testament to the advanced engineering skills of its people. The construction of the Great Enclosure and the hill complex would have been a tremendous feat of organization and labor. The fact that these structures have survived for centuries is a testament to the skill of the builders and the enduring strength of the kingdom they represented. While the exact techniques used to construct these stone buildings remain a subject of debate, it is clear that the people of Great Zimbabwe were skilled engineers and architects who understood the properties of stone and how to work with it. The walls of the Great Enclosure, for example, were built with such precision that they have withstood centuries of weathering and erosion. The fact that these structures continue to stand today, nearly 800 years after they were built, speaks volumes about the advanced engineering capabilities of the Great Zimbabwe civilization. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Great Zimbabwe had evolved from a small trading center into one of the most powerful kingdoms in southern Africa. The kingdom's wealth and influence were based on its strategic location, its control over vast trade networks, and its ability to produce valuable commodities such as gold and ivory. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe, the Mambo, wielded considerable political and military power, both within the kingdom and in their interactions with neighboring societies. The kingdom's growth was also supported by its agricultural base. The fertile lands surrounding Great Zimbabwe allowed its population to engage in large-scale farming, which provided food for the growing urban centers. This surplus in food production, coupled with the wealth generated from trade, enabled Great Zimbabwe to sustain a large and powerful population. The kingdom's urban centers, including the iconic city of Great Zimbabwe, were bustling hubs of commerce and culture, attracting traders and artisans from across the continent and beyond. The people of Great Zimbabwe built impressive stone structures that served as both residential and ceremonial spaces. The Great Enclosure, with its towering walls and conical towers, became a symbol of the kingdom's wealth and power. The hill complex, located on a nearby hill, was the center of political and religious activity, further cementing the kingdom's authority. The construction of these monumental structures required not only skilled labor, but also an organized and centralized political system that could mobilize resources and labor on such a massive scale. At the heart of the kingdom's political structure was the Mambo, the divine ruler. The Mambo was seen as both a political leader and a spiritual figure, believed to have the power to mediate between the gods and the people. This divine status granted the Mambo a significant degree of authority, and the ruler's court was a center of political and religious life. The Mambo's power was reinforced by the grandeur of the royal palace and the other monumental buildings that surrounded it, which serve as constant reminders of the ruler's divine right to govern. In addition to their role as rulers, the Mambo and his court also played a key role in overseeing the kingdom's trade networks. As the kingdom's trade routes expanded, so too did the wealth of the royal court. The Mambo and the elite class were able to accumulate vast amounts of wealth, which they used to fund military campaigns, build monumental structures, and sponsor the arts and culture of the kingdom. Religion played a crucial role in the political and social life of Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom was deeply influenced by ancestral worship and beliefs in the supernatural, which were central to the lives of the people. The Mambo, as the divine ruler, was believed to have a direct connection to the gods, and his role as both a political and spiritual leader reinforced the importance of religion in the kingdom's governance. The hill complex, located on a prominent hilltop in Great Zimbabwe, is thought to have been the center of religious and ceremonial life in the kingdom. This site was likely used for rituals that involved the worship of ancestors and the gods, which are believed to have a direct influence on the prosperity of the kingdom. These religious practices were an important aspect of the Mambo's divine status, as they helped to legitimize his authority and reinforce the social order. The people of Great Zimbabwe believed that their rulers had the ability to communicate with the gods and spirits of the land. This belief gave the Mambo and the royal court an almost sacred status, and it was thought that the kingdom's success depended on the ruler's ability to maintain a harmonious relationship with the spiritual world. The rituals performed at the hill complex and other sacred sites in the kingdom were seen as vital to the kingdom's prosperity and security. In addition to the religious practices centered around the Mambo, the people of Great Zimbabwe also practiced ancestor worship. This belief system held that the spirits of deceased ancestors could influence the living, either for good or ill. Ancestor worship was an integral part of daily life, and the people of Great Zimbabwe would often make offerings to their ancestors in the form of food, drink, and other symbolic gestures. These practices helped to maintain a sense of continuity between the living and the dead, reinforcing social cohesion and providing a sense of stability in the kingdom. The spiritual beliefs of Great Zimbabwe were closely tied to the land. The kingdom's sacred sites, such as the hill complex, were often located in places that were believed to be imbued with spiritual power. The people of Great Zimbabwe saw their connection to the land as a vital part of their identity, and the success of the kingdom was thought to be directly tied to the spiritual health of the land itself. This connection between the people, their rulers, and the land was one of the central tenets of the kingdom's belief system. Great Zimbabwe's strategic location along major trade routes connected it to a vast network of traders and travelers from distant lands. The kingdom was an integral part of the Indian Ocean trade network, which facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices across the region. This network extended from the Swahili coast to the Arabian Peninsula, India, and even China, making Great Zimbabwe a key player in this global system. The wealth generated by trade helped to fuel the kingdom's expansion, allowing it to extend its influence over a vast region. Traders brought a variety of goods into the kingdom, including textiles, pottery, and beads, which were highly prized by the people of Great Zimbabwe. In return, the kingdom exported gold, ivory, and copper, which were in high demand across the Indian Ocean trade network. The influence of foreign traders was not limited to material goods. As traders and visitors from distant lands passed through Great Zimbabwe, they brought with them new ideas and cultural practices that had a lasting impact on the kingdom. The people of Great Zimbabwe adopted certain elements of foreign cultures, particularly those of the Swahili city-states, whose architectural styles and artistic traditions left a mark on the kingdom's own cultural development. The Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe was also visited by foreign diplomats and travelers, who sought to establish political and economic ties with the powerful kingdom. These visitors came from a wide range of backgrounds, including Arab merchants, Portuguese explorers, and even traders from India and China. The accounts of these visitors provide valuable insight into the wealth, power, and cultural sophistication of Great Zimbabwe. One of the most famous accounts of a visit to Great Zimbabwe comes from the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama, who visited the Swahili coast in the late 15th century. While da Gama did not directly visit Great Zimbabwe, his accounts of the coastal city-states provide valuable context for understanding the kingdom's role in the Indian Ocean trade network. Other foreign visitors, including merchants and diplomats from the Middle East, also left behind records of their experiences, contributing to the historical record of Great Zimbabwe. By the late 15th century, the once thriving Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe began to show signs of decline. Several factors, both internal and external, contributed to the fall of this once powerful empire. The internal challenges of the kingdom were marked by changes in the political and economic landscape, which gradually eroded the stability that had once sustained the kingdom. One of the key internal factors was political instability. The Mambo, who had once been seen as a divine and unchallenged ruler, faced increasing challenges to their authority. As the kingdom grew in size and complexity, it became more difficult for the central authority of the Mambo to maintain control over such a vast territory. Regional leaders, or vassals, began to gain more autonomy, and local power structures began to shift. These regional leaders, who had once been loyal to the Mambo, began to assert their own control over trade routes, resources, and land. This decentralization of power weakened the kingdom's ability to respond to external threats and internal unrest. Another internal factor contributing to the decline of Great Zimbabwe was the overexploitation of the environment. The kingdom's agricultural system, which had once been highly productive, began to suffer due to deforestation and soil degradation. As the population grew, the demand for wood, particularly for building materials and fuel, led to the deforestation of large areas surrounding Great Zimbabwe. This loss of forests impacted the region's ability to produce food and other resources, contributing to food shortages and economic instability. The decline in agricultural productivity was further exacerbated by climate change. There is evidence to suggest that the region experienced periods of drought and unpredictable rainfall during the 14th and 15th centuries, which affected crop yields and the availability of water for livestock. These environmental stresses, combined with overuse of the land, led to a decline in the kingdom's agricultural output, which in turn impacted the economy. As the political and economic structure of Great Zimbabwe began to deteriorate, the once strong social cohesion that had held the kingdom together also began to unravel. The royal court, which had once been the center of power, became more isolated and less able to address the challenges facing the kingdom. The Mambo, once considered divine, struggled to maintain their legitimacy, and this weakened their influence over the people. In addition to the internal challenges faced by Great Zimbabwe, the kingdom also faced significant external pressures that contributed to its decline. The rise of powerful neighboring kingdoms, along with changing trade routes and the shifting dynamics of the Indian Ocean trade network, played a critical role in weakening Great Zimbabwe's position as a dominant power in the region. One of the key external factors was the rise of the Kingdom of Matapa, which emerged in the 15th century as a rival to Great Zimbabwe. The Matapa Kingdom, located to the north of Great Zimbabwe, was able to take advantage of the weakening of its southern neighbor and gradually absorb much of its territory. The Matapa Kingdom's control over key gold-producing regions and its access to trade routes allowed it to challenge Great Zimbabwe's dominance in the region. Over time, the Matapa Kingdom became a major player in the Indian Ocean trade network, further eroding the power and influence of Great Zimbabwe. In addition to the rise of rival kingdoms, the changing dynamics of the Indian Ocean trade network also played a significant role in the decline of Great Zimbabwe. As Portuguese explorers and traders began to establish a stronger presence along the Swahili coast in the late 15th century, new trade routes were opened up that bypassed Great Zimbabwe. The Portuguese established direct trade links with the Swahili city-states and the interior of Africa, effectively cutting off Great Zimbabwe from its once thriving trade connections. The Portuguese were particularly interested in controlling the gold trade, which had been a major source of wealth for Great Zimbabwe. With the rise of Portuguese influence in the region, the once vibrant trade routes that passed through Great Zimbabwe became less significant, further contributing to the kingdom's economic decline. Moreover, the increased presence of Portuguese traders and explorers along the East African coast disrupted the established trade networks and brought new challenges to the region. The Portuguese' establishment of forts and trading posts along the coast further diminished the importance of Great Zimbabwe as a key player in the regional trade system. The decline in trade revenues, combined with political instability and internal unrest, led to the gradual collapse of Great Zimbabwe as a major power. By the end of the 15th century, Great Zimbabwe had entered a period of decline that would eventually lead to its abandonment. As the political, economic, and environmental pressures mounted, the kingdom's once thriving cities began to suffer. The famous stone structures, which had once symbolized the power and wealth of the kingdom, became neglected and fell into ruin. The decline of the Mambo's authority, the disruption of trade routes, and the exhaustion of the region's natural resources all contributed to the eventual collapse of Great Zimbabwe as a political and cultural force. The ruling elite, who had once relied on trade, agriculture, and political alliances to maintain their power, were no longer able to adapt to the changing circumstances. Without a strong central authority, the kingdom fractured into smaller, less organized political entities. The final years of Great Zimbabwe were marked by a gradual exodus of people from the city. Many of the inhabitants of Great Zimbabwe likely moved to nearby areas, including the newly emerging kingdom of Matapa, where they sought new opportunities and safety. The abandonment of the great city was not a sudden event, but rather a slow decline over several decades. By the early 16th century, the city of Great Zimbabwe was largely deserted, and its once grand stone buildings stood as silent witnesses to the fall of a great civilization. The exact reasons for the abandonment of Great Zimbabwe remain a topic of debate among historians and archaeologists. Some scholars believe that the shift in trade routes and the rise of Matapa played a major role in the kingdom's collapse. Others point to the environmental degradation caused by deforestation and soil erosion, which may have contributed to the kingdom's inability to sustain its population. What is clear, however, is that the decline of Great Zimbabwe marked the end of one of the most remarkable civilizations in African history. As Great Zimbabwe fell into decline by the end of the 15th century, the power vacuum left in its wake led to the rise of new kingdoms and political entities. The most prominent successor kingdom to emerge in the aftermath of Great Zimbabwe's collapse was the Kingdom of Matapa, which established itself as a major political and economic force in the region. The Matapa Kingdom, centered to the north of Great Zimbabwe, inherited many of the wealth-producing areas that had once belonged to Great Zimbabwe, including key gold mines and control over vital trade routes. The Kingdom of Matapa, also known as the Mwenimutapa Kingdom, came to dominate the region during the 16th century. It had a similar social structure to that of Great Zimbabwe, with a divine ruler, the Mwenimutapa, at its head. The kingdom flourished due to its control over gold-producing regions and its ability to maintain significant trade relations with Portuguese traders who began to establish a presence along the East African coast in the late 15th century. Matapa, therefore, benefited from the resources and the trade connections that had once made Great Zimbabwe a prominent power. However, while Matapa grew in strength, it was not immune to many of the same challenges that led to the decline of Great Zimbabwe. Internal political fragmentation, environmental degradation, and external pressures, particularly from Portuguese colonial forces and rival African kingdoms, eventually contributed to its downfall as well. Some scholars believe that the shift in trade routes and the rise of Matapa played a major role in the kingdom's collapse. Others point to the environmental degradation caused by deforestation and soil erosion, which may have contributed to the kingdom's inability to sustain its population. What is clear, however, is that the decline of Great Zimbabwe marked the end of one of the most remarkable civilizations in African history. As Great Zimbabwe fell into decline by the end of the 15th century, the power vacuum left in its wake led to the rise of new kingdoms and political entities. The most prominent successor kingdom to emerge in the aftermath of Great Zimbabwe's collapse was the Kingdom of Matapa, which established itself as a major political and economic force in the region. The Matapa Kingdom, centered to the north of Great Zimbabwe, inherited many of the wealth-producing areas that had once belonged to Great Zimbabwe, including key gold mines and control over vital trade routes. The Kingdom of Matapa, also known as the Mwenimutapa Kingdom, came to dominate the region during the 16th century. It had a similar social structure to that of Great Zimbabwe, with a divine ruler, the Mwenimutapa, at its head. The kingdom flourished due to its control over gold-producing regions and its ability to maintain significant trade relations with Portuguese traders who began to establish a presence along the East African coast in the late 15th century. Matapa, therefore, benefited from the resources and the trade connections that had once made Great Zimbabwe a prominent power. However, while Matapa grew in strength, it was not immune to many of the same challenges that led to the decline of Great Zimbabwe. Internal political fragmentation, environmental degradation, and external pressures, particularly from Portuguese colonial forces and rival African kingdoms, eventually contributed to its downfall as well. By the 17th century, Matapa itself began to fragment into smaller, less centralized entities, signaling the end of another great African empire in the region. Despite its decline, the Kingdom of Matapa played an important role in preserving the legacy of Great Zimbabwe, particularly through the continuity of trade networks and cultural practices. The rise of new powers like Matapa illustrates how the collapse of one kingdom can lead to the reorganization and rebirth of new political and economic systems. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe, therefore, lived on through the kingdoms that succeeded it, although the monumental structures and grand city-state that had once existed in the heart of Zimbabwe remained abandoned, a silent testament to the civilization that had once flourished there. While the Kingdom of Matapa emerged as a successor to Great Zimbabwe in the 16th century, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe itself lay abandoned for centuries. The monumental stone structures, once symbols of political power, wealth, and cultural sophistication, fell into obscurity, largely forgotten by the outside world. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe was kept alive through oral traditions, but it wasn't until the 19th century that the ruins would be rediscovered by outsiders, and even then, their significance would remain largely misunderstood for some time. The first known European exploration of the Great Zimbabwe ruins took place in 1867 when the British explorer and trader Karl Mach stumbled upon the site. Mach was fascinated by the structures, but due to the prevailing European ideas of the time, he mistakenly attributed their construction to the ancient Phoenicians, or even to the Queen of Sheba. This theory was widely accepted by some, who struggled to believe that indigenous Africans could have built such an advanced civilization. Mach's assertion was part of a larger trend of European scholars and explorers who often ignored or undervalued the achievements of African civilizations, preferring to attribute African achievements to outsiders. In the years following Mach's visit, other explorers and archaeologists began to study the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. However, it was not until the early 20th century that a more systematic and scientifically rigorous approach to studying the site was undertaken. In the 1920s and 1930s, the site began to receive greater attention from archaeologists, including the British archaeologist Gertrude Cotton-Thompson. Her work was crucial in dispelling the myths surrounding the origins of Great Zimbabwe and establishing its status as an indigenous African civilization. Through her excavations and research, Cotton-Thompson concluded that the stone ruins were built by the ancestors of the Shona people, debunking the earlier theories that had sought to attribute the construction of the site to foreign, non-African peoples. This scholarly shift had significant cultural and political implications. The rediscovery of Great Zimbabwe and the recognition that it was an African achievement became a source of national pride for Zimbabweans and a symbol of Africa's rich and complex history. The significance of Great Zimbabwe as a great African civilization began to be more widely appreciated in the context of the broader history of African societies, helping to challenge colonial narratives that had long marginalized the achievements of African peoples. In the 20th century, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe became a symbol of resistance to colonial rule. During the period of Zimbabwean independence struggles, the ruins were adopted as a symbol of national identity and pride, particularly during the era of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU. The importance of the site grew as the independence movement gained momentum, and Great Zimbabwe became a focal point of political discourse in the fight for liberation from colonial rule. In 1980, when Zimbabwe gained its independence from Britain, the country's new government recognized the significance of Great Zimbabwe as a symbol of African heritage. The country's new flag and currency would feature symbols inspired by the ruins, cementing the site's role as a cornerstone of Zimbabwean national identity. The cultural and historical legacy of Great Zimbabwe is vast, and its impact is still felt today. The ruins of Great Zimbabwe, with their awe-inspiring architecture and historical significance, serve as a symbol of the advanced capabilities of pre-colonial African societies. Great Zimbabwe's construction techniques, artistic achievements, and social organization stand as testimony to the ingenuity and complexity of African civilizations, debunking the myths that portrayed Africa as lacking in sophistication and cultural development. The stone architecture of Great Zimbabwe, particularly the Great Enclosure and Hill Complex, showcases the kingdom's advanced understanding of engineering and urban planning. The dry stone construction method employed in these buildings, without the use of mortar, remains an extraordinary feat of craftsmanship and engineering. The Great Enclosure, with its massive circular walls, is a stunning example of the architectural prowess of the people of Great Zimbabwe. These structures were not merely utilitarian. They were expressions of power, identity, and belief. The remains of the kingdom's royal complexes, with their conical towers and intricate walls, speak to the religious and cultural significance that these buildings held in the lives of the people. In addition to its architectural legacy, Great Zimbabwe's cultural impact extends to its art, craftsmanship, and social structure. The kingdom was known for its intricate beadwork, pottery, and sculpture, all of which continue to influence modern African art. The art produced by the people of Great Zimbabwe was not only functional, but also symbolic, with many pieces representing spiritual beliefs, social status, and political power. Great Zimbabwe's political structure, with its system of regional leaders and centralized authority under the Mambo, laid the foundation for the governance systems of later kingdoms in the region. The legacy of the Mambo, as both a political and spiritual leader, would influence later African rulers, particularly in the Kingdom of Matapa. The social hierarchy of Great Zimbabwe, with its distinction between elites, artisans, farmers, and laborers, also influenced the structure of successor kingdoms and societies. Moreover, the archaeological work at Great Zimbabwe has contributed significantly to the study of African history and pre-colonial societies. By re-evaluating the historical record of Great Zimbabwe, scholars have been able to construct a more accurate and nuanced understanding of African history, one that acknowledges the agency and achievements of African peoples before the arrival of European colonizers. This new perspective has had profound implications for how African history is taught and understood both within Africa and globally. After Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, Great Zimbabwe became an important symbol of national pride and unity. The ruins, once abandoned and forgotten, were now embraced as a crucial part of the nation's heritage and historical identity. This shift marked a profound change in how the country viewed its past, as it reclaimed the cultural and historical achievements of its ancestors. The influence of Great Zimbabwe can be seen in national symbols, such as the national flag and the country's currency. The Zimbabwean flag features the iconic image of the Zimbabwe bird, a sculptural symbol associated with Great Zimbabwe. The bird, carved from soapstone, was found at the site of the Great Enclosure and is believed to represent power and spiritual significance. The adoption of the Zimbabwe bird as a national symbol reinforced the idea of Great Zimbabwe as a key foundation of the modern nation's identity. It was a potent symbol that connected the newly independent country with its ancient past offering a sense of continuity and pride. The country's currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, also featured images of the ruins, reinforcing the deep connection between the ancient kingdom and modern Zimbabwe. By doing so, the nation paid homage to its ancestors and their remarkable achievements. This symbolic connection helped shape the narrative of Zimbabwe's independence, positioning the country as a proud successor to the great civilizations of Africa, and particularly to the legacy of Great Zimbabwe. The importance of Great Zimbabwe as a national symbol was not limited to political and cultural expressions. It also became a focal point for tourism. The ruins, which had once been relegated to obscurity, began to attract international attention in the late 20th century. As more people traveled to Zimbabwe, the historical significance of the site became widely recognized, and Great Zimbabwe began to be celebrated not only as a key part of African history, but as a major cultural treasure. Tourism to the site provided both a means of preserving the ruins and a way of educating the world about the rich history of pre-colonial Africa. In addition to the political and cultural dimensions of its symbolism, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe also became a powerful reminder of the resilience and ingenuity of African civilizations. The recognition of this legacy was essential in countering colonial narratives that had long marginalized the achievements of African societies. The connection between the past and the present was important for the people of Zimbabwe, as it provided a tangible link to their ancestors and reaffirmed their place in the broader African and global historical narrative. While Great Zimbabwe has been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, efforts to preserve its ruins have faced numerous challenges. The site, located in southeastern Zimbabwe, is subjected to environmental stresses, including erosion and weathering caused by the region's hot and dry climate. The ongoing preservation of the ruins has been a key concern for both the Zimbabwean government and international organizations dedicated to heritage conservation. One of the main challenges in preserving Great Zimbabwe is the issue of tourism. As one of the country's most important cultural attractions, the site draws visitors from around the world. However, the influx of tourists, combined with the impact of climate change, poses a threat to the integrity of the ruins. Erosion, particularly in the Great Enclosure, has become a major concern, as the exposure of the stone walls to the elements leads to the gradual deterioration of the structures. In response to these challenges, the Zimbabwean government, in collaboration with UNESCO, has implemented various conservation measures to protect the site. These efforts include limiting visitor access to certain areas of the ruins, implementing restoration projects, and developing educational programs to raise awareness about the importance of preserving the site. Additionally, the site's designation as a World Heritage Site has helped to attract funding and resources for preservation, allowing for more extensive research and conservation work. Despite these efforts, the preservation of Great Zimbabwe is an ongoing struggle. The combination of natural factors, such as the erosion of the stone structures, and human pressures, such as tourism and nearby development, continues to threaten the site's long-term stability. The challenge of balancing the needs of preservation with those of economic development remains an important issue for Zimbabwe. Nonetheless, the continued international recognition of Great Zimbabwe as a cultural treasure has sparked conversations about the importance of preserving Africa's historical heritage. The site has become a focal point for discussions about how best to protect the cultural legacies of African civilizations, particularly in the context of post-colonial identity. As Zimbabwe moves forward, the preservation of Great Zimbabwe serves as a reminder of the need to safeguard the continent's diverse and rich history for future generations. The influence of Great Zimbabwe extends far beyond the borders of modern Zimbabwe. As one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations in pre-colonial Africa, the legacy of Great Zimbabwe had a lasting impact on the cultural and historical development of southern Africa and the wider African continent. The kingdom's achievements in architecture, trade, and governance continue to inspire admiration and scholarly interest today. The architectural innovations of Great Zimbabwe, particularly its dry stone construction, influenced the development of other African societies. Similar building techniques were adopted by other kingdoms in the region, including the Kingdom of Matapa and the Kingdom of Malawi. The use of stone in the construction of royal palaces and religious structures became a hallmark of the Southern African architectural tradition, and the legacy of Great Zimbabwe's engineering expertise continues to be appreciated by modern architects and archaeologists. In addition to its architectural influence, the kingdom's role as a major trading power helped shape the economic and cultural development of the wider African continent. The trade networks that Great Zimbabwe helped establish connected the kingdom with distant regions of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The exchange of goods such as gold, ivory, and pottery played a crucial role in shaping the cultures of both the Swahili coast and inland kingdoms. These trade routes continued to thrive even after the decline of Great Zimbabwe, and many of the cultural practices and commodities associated with the kingdom were passed down to subsequent generations. Great Zimbabwe's impact on the broader African world can also be seen in the development of regional political structures. The kingdom's social hierarchy, which included a powerful ruler at the top and a network of regional leaders beneath them, became a model for other kingdoms in southern Africa. The influence of the Mambo, the divine ruler, can be seen in the political structures of later African kingdoms, where kings and chiefs held both political and religious authority. This dual role of the leader as both a spiritual and temporal figure was a key feature of many African governance systems and can be traced back to the example set by Great Zimbabwe. On a broader scale, the cultural and historical impact of Great Zimbabwe has contributed to the growing recognition of Africa's rich and diverse pre-colonial history. The ruins of Great Zimbabwe serve as a powerful symbol of the accomplishments of African civilizations, challenging the Eurocentric narratives that have often overlooked the contributions of African societies. The recognition of Great Zimbabwe as a World Heritage Site has helped to ensure that its story is told and preserved for future generations. Furthermore, the global recognition of Great Zimbabwe as an important cultural and historical site has inspired a broader rethinking of Africa's place in world history. The ruins stand as a testament to the continent's long and complex history of civilization, demonstrating that Africa was home to sophisticated societies long before the arrival of European colonizers. Great Zimbabwe's legacy continues to inspire scholars, students, and individuals around the world who seek to understand the depth and breadth of Africa's historical contributions. Great Zimbabwe stands as one of the most prominent examples of the advanced civilizations that thrived in sub-Saharan Africa before European colonization. The history of Great Zimbabwe is not just the history of a single kingdom, but rather a window into the broader historical and cultural developments of the African continent. The civilization offers valuable insights into the complexities of pre-colonial African societies, from their political structures to their cultural practices, economic systems, and technological achievements. In the context of African history, Great Zimbabwe shares its legacy with other notable civilizations such as the Kingdom of Aksum, the Mali Empire, the Kingdom of Kush, and the Yoruba city-states. Like these other civilizations, Great Zimbabwe developed independently, creating its own distinctive culture and achievements. Its success, particularly in trade, is reflective of the extensive networks of commerce that spanned the African continent and connected it to other parts of the world. The wealth of Great Zimbabwe was built upon its control over the gold trade, which was vital to the economies of both inland African kingdoms and coastal city-states. The kingdom's strategic location enabled it to link the interior with the Indian Ocean world, creating an economic system that benefited from international commerce. This vast trading network, which connected Great Zimbabwe to places as far as China, India, and the Arabian Peninsula, positioned the kingdom as a regional power. The trade routes facilitated the exchange of not only goods, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices, which contributed to the development of a vibrant and cosmopolitan society. Politically, the structure of Great Zimbabwe offers valuable lessons in the organization of power in pre-colonial Africa. The kingdom was ruled by the Mambo, a divine monarch who embodied both spiritual and temporal authority. This model of governance was not unique to Great Zimbabwe, but was reflected in other African societies, where the ruler often held both political and religious power. This dual role of the leader reinforced social order and centralized control, helping to maintain stability and unity within the kingdom. Great Zimbabwe's architectural achievements, particularly its stone structures, have made it a symbol of African ingenuity and advanced engineering. The use of dry stone construction, which allowed for the creation of large, durable buildings without mortar, is a testament to the technical skill of the builders. The Great Enclosure, with its massive walls and conical towers, remains an enduring symbol of the kingdom's power and sophistication. These architectural feats, along with the kingdom's artistic achievements in pottery, sculpture, and beadwork, highlight the cultural vibrancy and creativity of the people of Great Zimbabwe. The role of trade in the rise and prosperity of Great Zimbabwe cannot be overstated. The kingdom's access to vital trade routes, particularly those that connected it to the Indian Ocean trade network, allowed it to become a central player in the regional and global economy. Great Zimbabwe's economy was built on the exchange of goods such as gold, ivory, and copper, which were in high demand across the Indian Ocean world. This trade not only brought wealth to the kingdom, but also facilitated cultural exchange, which enriched the civilization. Gold, in particular, was a crucial commodity for Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom's gold mines, located in the hinterland, provided a steady supply of the precious metal, which was traded with Arab merchants, Indian traders, and Swahili city-states along the coast. In exchange, Great Zimbabwe received luxury goods such as beads, textiles, ceramics, and spices. The influx of these foreign goods contributed to the cosmopolitan nature of the kingdom, as the elites of Great Zimbabwe adorned themselves with imported textiles and jewelry, reflecting their wealth and status. Cultural exchange also played a significant role in shaping the society of Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom's location along trade routes meant that it was exposed to a variety of cultural influences, particularly from the Swahili coast and the Arabian Peninsula. The Swahili city-states, which had strong ties to the Indian Ocean trade, were important intermediaries between the interior of Africa and the wider world. Through their interactions with traders from Arabia, India, and Persia, the people of Great Zimbabwe adopted various aspects of Swahili culture, including architectural styles, artistic traditions, and even certain religious practices. The influence of Islamic culture brought to the region by Arab traders is evident in the artistic and architectural elements of Great Zimbabwe. The use of geometric patterns in pottery and the incorporation of foreign materials, such as glass and metal, were likely inspired by Islamic and Arab traditions. Furthermore, the rise of the Swahili city-states along the East African coast, which developed a hybrid culture blending African, Arab, and Persian elements, had a lasting impact on the people of Great Zimbabwe. The architectural techniques and design elements of the Swahili coast, particularly the use of coral stone in building construction, influenced the stonework of Great Zimbabwe, as both cultures shared a focus on creating durable, monumental structures. Through these interactions, Great Zimbabwe became part of a larger network of cultural exchange that spanned the Indian Ocean and connected African societies with the broader world. The kingdom's participation in this exchange helped foster the development of a rich and diverse culture that reflected the blend of indigenous African traditions with influences from the Arab world and beyond. The intellectual legacy of Great Zimbabwe is an often overlooked aspect of the kingdom's history. It played a vital role in shaping the civilization's achievements. The intellectual and artistic traditions of Great Zimbabwe reflect a deep connection to the natural world, as well as a sophisticated understanding of science, engineering, and mathematics. These intellectual pursuits are evidenced by the kingdom's architectural feats, its complex social and political systems, and its vibrant artistic traditions. The construction of the stone structures at Great Zimbabwe required advanced knowledge of engineering and mathematics. The builders of the Great Enclosure and other monumental structures employed precise measurements and complex calculations to create durable buildings that have withstood centuries of erosion and weathering. The use of dry stone construction, in which large stones were fitted together without mortar, required not only technical skill, but also an understanding of how materials behave under different environmental conditions. The lasting durability of these buildings attests to the intellectual prowess of the kingdom's engineers and architects. The artistic achievements of Great Zimbabwe also reflect the kingdom's intellectual sophistication. The people of Great Zimbabwe were skilled artisans who created intricate pottery, sculptures, and jewelry. These objects were not only functional, but also had deep symbolic and spiritual significance. The use of geometric patterns in pottery and the creation of symbolic sculptures, such as the Zimbabwe bird, demonstrate a complex understanding of form, function, and meaning. The kingdom's intellectual legacy can also be seen in its social and political systems. The governance model of Great Zimbabwe, in which the Mambo held both spiritual and temporal authority, reflects a sophisticated understanding of power and authority. The centralization of power in the hands of the Mambo, combined with a system of regional leaders who maintained local control, allowed for the smooth operation of the kingdom's political and economic systems. The organization of labor, particularly in the construction of the stone structures, also indicates a high level of social and economic organization. The intellectual traditions of Great Zimbabwe, particularly in the fields of engineering, art, and governance, have influenced subsequent generations of African societies. The kingdom's focus on education, innovation, and cultural expression laid the foundation for future civilizations in the region. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe continues to be felt in modern Zimbabwe, where the achievements of the kingdom are celebrated as a testament to the intellectual and cultural richness of Africa. The history of Great Zimbabwe holds immense significance not only for the people of Zimbabwe, but also for the broader African historiography. For centuries, the contributions of African civilizations were largely marginalized by colonial scholars and historians. The achievements of African kingdoms, such as Great Zimbabwe, were often overlooked or attributed to external forces. This Eurocentric perspective contributed to the perpetuation of the myth that Africa had no great civilizations prior to European colonization. The rediscovery of Great Zimbabwe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries marked a turning point in the study of African history. The site's significance as a monumental achievement in African architecture, trade, and governance challenged prevailing assumptions about African societies. The recognition that the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe were the work of indigenous Africans provided powerful evidence that African civilizations were capable of building complex political structures and engaging in long-distance trade and cultural exchange. Scholars, particularly in the post-colonial era, have increasingly recognized the importance of Great Zimbabwe in the context of African history. The study of the kingdom's rise, decline, and cultural legacy has become central to understanding the broader history of Southern Africa. Great Zimbabwe is no longer seen as an isolated or anomalous civilization, but rather as part of the rich tapestry of African history that includes powerful kingdoms like Aksum, Mali, Ghana, and Songhai, all of which had significant contributions to global culture and history. The re-evaluation of African civilizations, with Great Zimbabwe as one of its key symbols, has reshaped the narrative of African history. Scholars now emphasize the agency of African peoples in shaping their own destinies, rather than attributing their achievements to external influences. The study of Great Zimbabwe and other African civilizations helps to correct historical distortions and ensures that African contributions to world history are recognized and celebrated. The historical significance of Great Zimbabwe has also inspired African nationalists, who have used the ruins as a symbol of resistance against colonial oppression and as a source of pride in the face of historical marginalization. The nation-building efforts of post-colonial Zimbabwe and other African countries have drawn upon the rich history of the continent's pre-colonial civilizations to foster a sense of pride and identity. Although Great Zimbabwe was a regional power in southern Africa, its contributions to global history are significant, particularly in the context of trade, cultural exchange, and architectural innovation. The kingdom's involvement in the Indian Ocean trade network made it a vital link between the African interior and the broader world. Through its connections with the Swahili coast, Arab traders, and merchants from India, Great Zimbabwe played a key role in the transcontinental flow of goods, ideas, and technologies. The trade routes that passed through Great Zimbabwe connected the kingdom to other African societies and to distant markets in the Middle East, India, and China. This allowed Great Zimbabwe to import goods such as pottery, glass beads, textiles, and luxury items, while exporting gold, ivory, and copper. These exchanges not only brought wealth to the kingdom, but also facilitated the spread of cultural and technological innovations. One of the most important contributions of Great Zimbabwe to global history was its architectural achievements. The dry stone construction techniques used to build the kingdom's monumental stone structures, such as the Great Enclosure and the Hill Complex, were a remarkable feat of engineering and craftsmanship. These structures, which have stood for centuries, continue to inspire awe and admiration for their durability and sophistication. The fact that these buildings were constructed without mortar, using precisely cut stone blocks, demonstrates the advanced engineering knowledge of the people of Great Zimbabwe. The influence of Great Zimbabwe's architectural techniques can be seen in other parts of Africa, particularly in the building traditions of neighboring regions. The use of stone construction and the emphasis on durable, lasting buildings were adopted by later civilizations in the region, including the Kingdom of Matapa. Great Zimbabwe's architectural legacy, therefore, extends far beyond its own borders, contributing to the development of African architecture and engineering. Furthermore, Great Zimbabwe's participation in the Indian Ocean trade network facilitated the exchange of ideas and technologies that had global implications. Through trade, the kingdom was exposed to Islamic cultural practices, which influenced the kingdom's art and architecture. Additionally, the Swahili coast, with its diverse population of African, Arab, and Persian traders, helped foster a cosmopolitan culture that had far-reaching effects on the broader African world. The global significance of Great Zimbabwe, therefore, extends beyond its own achievements. The kingdom was a vital part of a larger network of trade and cultural exchange that spanned the Indian Ocean, connecting Africa to Asia and the Middle East. Through this network, Great Zimbabwe helped shape the flow of goods and ideas that would have a lasting impact on the world. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe remains highly relevant in today's global world. The civilization's achievements continue to serve as an inspiration for modern African nations, particularly in their efforts to reclaim and preserve their cultural heritage. Great Zimbabwe stands as a symbol of Africa's rich historical legacy and serves as a powerful reminder of the continent's capacity for innovation, creativity, and resilience. In the modern era, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe have become a focal point for discussions about heritage preservation, cultural tourism, and national identity. The site's designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986 has helped to ensure its protection and preservation for future generations. However, the challenges of maintaining such an important cultural site are considerable, particularly given the pressures of climate change, tourism, and development. Ongoing efforts to protect and preserve the ruins have highlighted the importance of safeguarding Africa's historical sites and ensuring that they continue to inspire future generations. Moreover, Great Zimbabwe's legacy has contributed to a broader rethinking of Africa's role in world history. The recognition of Great Zimbabwe as an indigenous African achievement has helped to challenge the stereotypes and misperceptions about Africa's history that were perpetuated during the colonial era. Today, scholars and historians emphasize the agency of African peoples in shaping their own history and culture, and Great Zimbabwe plays a central role in this narrative. The cultural impact of Great Zimbabwe extends beyond the academic realm and into popular culture. The ruins have become a symbol of African pride, not just in Zimbabwe, but throughout the continent. They have been featured in literature, art, and film, serving as a reminder of Africa's rich and diverse history. As African nations continue to assert their cultural identity and reclaim their historical heritage, Great Zimbabwe remains a key symbol of the continent's strength and resilience. In the global context, the legacy of Great Zimbabwe serves as a reminder of the interconnectedness of the world's cultures and civilizations. Through trade, art, and architecture, Great Zimbabwe contributed to the broader story of human history, bridging cultures and connecting distant lands. The legacy of this great African civilization is not confined to Zimbabwe alone, but resonates with people around the world who seek to understand and appreciate the richness of Africa's history. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe holds immense significance, not just in terms of its historical achievements, but also in the context of modern African development. Understanding the history of Great Zimbabwe offers valuable insights into the potential for sustainable development within Africa. The kingdom's success in managing its resources, especially its extensive trade networks and agricultural base, provides a model for how pre-colonial African civilizations were able to thrive without external assistance or the interference of colonial powers. One of the key aspects of Great Zimbabwe's success was its efficient use of local resources. The kingdom was able to harness the wealth of its land through effective agricultural practices, particularly in its reliance on crop rotation and animal husbandry. The fertile lands surrounding Great Zimbabwe allowed the civilization to support a large population, which, in turn, helped fuel the growth of the kingdom's trade networks. Agriculture was the backbone of Great Zimbabwe's economy, and its ability to produce surplus goods such as food and cattle helped maintain a stable society. In addition to agriculture, Great Zimbabwe's ability to control vital trade routes played a significant role in its economic success. The kingdom controlled the trade of gold and ivory, two commodities in high demand along the Indian Ocean trade network. The resources of Great Zimbabwe allowed it to participate in international trade, bringing in luxury goods such as textiles, ceramics, and spices, while exporting precious metals to regions as far as China and the Arabian Peninsula. The rise and fall of Great Zimbabwe also serve as a case study in the challenges of managing natural resources in the face of population growth and environmental changes. The kingdom's decline can be partially attributed to the overexploitation of its land, which led to soil degradation and deforestation. These environmental issues, combined with external pressures such as the shifting dynamics of trade routes and competition from neighboring kingdoms, contributed to the collapse of the once thriving kingdom. The lessons of Great Zimbabwe can be applied to modern African societies, particularly in terms of sustainable resource management, climate resilience, and the preservation of natural landscapes. The history of Great Zimbabwe underscores the importance of fostering self-sufficiency and sustainable growth. In the context of contemporary African development, the ability to balance economic, social, and environmental needs is crucial to achieving long-term stability and prosperity. The history of Great Zimbabwe reminds us that African societies were capable of achieving great feats independently, long before the advent of colonialism or the influence of foreign powers. Great Zimbabwe's legacy extends beyond the realm of politics and trade into the world of art and culture. The artistic achievements of the kingdom, particularly in the fields of sculpture, pottery, and beadwork, have left an indelible mark on African art traditions. The kingdom's stone carvings, especially the iconic Zimbabwe birds, are among the most recognized symbols of African art, and they continue to inspire contemporary African artists and craftsmen. The Zimbabwe birds, found at the Great Enclosure, are perhaps the most famous artistic creations associated with Great Zimbabwe. These sculptures, carved from soapstone, have come to symbolize the kingdom's power, spirituality, and cultural heritage. The birds are thought to represent the kingdom's divine rulers, and they are often interpreted as symbols of protection and guidance. Their intricate designs and symbolism highlight the sophisticated artistic traditions of the kingdom and its deep connection to spiritual beliefs. In addition to the Zimbabwe birds, Great Zimbabwe is known for its exceptional pottery, which was used both for practical and ceremonial purposes. Pottery in Great Zimbabwe was highly decorative, featuring geometric patterns and symbolic motifs that reflected the cultural and spiritual values of the kingdom. Pottery served as a medium for artistic expression and was often used in religious rituals and offerings to the gods and ancestors. These artistic traditions were passed down through generations and have influenced the development of African art across the continent. Beadwork was another important aspect of Great Zimbabwe's artistic heritage. Beads were used not only for adornment, but also as symbols of status, wealth, and identity. The kingdom's beadwork traditions were closely tied to social hierarchies, with different types of beads indicating one's rank and position within society. The intricate designs of these beads reflect the kingdom's artistic sophistication and its rich cultural heritage. The art of Great Zimbabwe was also deeply intertwined with the kingdom's architecture. The stone walls of the Great Enclosure and the hill complex, built without mortar, are prime examples of the kingdom's architectural ingenuity. The design of these structures, with their use of geometric patterns and symbolic motifs, demonstrates the kingdom's understanding of aesthetics, proportion, and form. The architectural traditions of Great Zimbabwe, particularly in terms of dry stone construction, influenced later African societies and are still celebrated in African architectural practices today. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe is not confined to the borders of modern Zimbabwe, but extends to the African diaspora, particularly in the Americas and the Caribbean. African slaves, many of whom were brought to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade, carried with them cultural traditions and memories of their ancestral homeland. These cultural connections have been preserved in various forms, including oral traditions, art, music, and religious practices. The history of Great Zimbabwe, as a powerful and ancient civilization, has influenced the way African-descended peoples across the world view their heritage and their place in history. In the Caribbean, particularly in places like Jamaica and Trinidad, the legacy of Great Zimbabwe is often reflected in the cultural practices of the Afro-descendant populations. Many African slaves in the Americas retained a deep connection to their African roots, even if they were physically removed from their ancestral homelands. The artistic traditions of Great Zimbabwe, including beadwork, pottery, and sculpture, have influenced the cultural expressions of the African diaspora, which often features similar motifs and designs. In the United States, the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the rise of black nationalism in the 1970s led to a renewed interest in African heritage, including the history of Great Zimbabwe. African Americans, seeking to reconnect with their African ancestry, began to explore the history of African civilizations that had been erased or misrepresented by colonial powers. Great Zimbabwe, with its advanced architecture and vibrant culture, became a symbol of African pride and achievement during this period. The rediscovery of the kingdom's legacy helped to challenge the stereotypes that had long painted Africa as a land of primitive tribes and unorganized societies. Furthermore, the cultural renaissance that accompanied the decolonization movement in Africa during the mid-20th century helped to promote the legacy of Great Zimbabwe and other African civilizations. Artists, writers, and intellectuals from the African diaspora began to reclaim Africa's history and culture, highlighting the achievements of civilizations such as Great Zimbabwe and using them as symbols of African identity and resilience. Today, the legacy of Great Zimbabwe continues to inspire and inform the African diaspora. The kingdom's remarkable achievements in trade, architecture, and culture serve as a reminder of the depth and richness of African civilization and its lasting influence on the world. The story of Great Zimbabwe is a testament to the enduring strength of African identity, even in the face of colonization, slavery, and historical erasure. The decline of Great Zimbabwe in the late 15th century led to the rise of a number of powerful successor states in the region, most notably the Kingdom of Matapa. Located to the north of Great Zimbabwe, Matapa grew to prominence as a regional power, absorbing much of the territory once controlled by Great Zimbabwe. While Great Zimbabwe's reign had diminished by the time Matapa rose to prominence, the legacy of the former kingdom remained deeply embedded in the political and cultural fabric of the region. The Kingdom of Matapa, sometimes called the Mwenimutapa Kingdom, established itself as a significant player in the Indian Ocean trade network, largely through its access to the gold-rich regions that had once belonged to Great Zimbabwe. The Matapa Kingdom flourished due to its control over these lucrative resources and its ability to manage the complex networks of trade between the interior of Africa and the Swahili coast, which had previously been central to Great Zimbabwe's economy. Despite the political transition, many of the cultural and social practices of Great Zimbabwe persisted in Matapa. The ruling class of Matapa, like their predecessors in Great Zimbabwe, continued to maintain the dual role of political and spiritual leadership. The Mwenimutapa, the kingdom's ruler, was seen as both a divine figure and a temporal king. This spiritual connection to the land, much like the Mambo in Great Zimbabwe, was fundamental to the political order and the legitimacy of the Matapa rulers. The royal court of Matapa was heavily influenced by the ceremonial traditions of Great Zimbabwe, particularly in the rituals performed at royal residences. In terms of trade, Matapa maintained the gold mining operations and trade networks that had been established by Great Zimbabwe, although its political and economic ties to the Portuguese, who began to establish a presence along the East African coast in the late 15th century, would ultimately lead to a shift in the region's power dynamics. Despite these external influences, the legacy of Great Zimbabwe, particularly its cultural practices and economic systems, continued to shape the Kingdom of Matapa throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. while Matapa eventually faced its own internal and external challenges, including Portuguese interference and internal power struggles. It serves as a testament to the enduring influence of Great Zimbabwe. The continuity of trade routes, governance systems, and cultural practices between the two kingdoms underscores the lasting legacy of Great Zimbabwe in the region. Another critical element of the rise and influence of Great Zimbabwe was its participation in the Indian Ocean trade network, which connected sub-Saharan Africa to Asia and the Middle East. The Swahili Coast, a series of city-states located along the East African coastline, played a key role in facilitating trade between the African interior and the broader world. Though Great Zimbabwe was not directly located on the coast, it relied heavily on its relationships with the Swahili city-states to engage in international commerce. The Swahili coast acted as a middleman, linking the gold, ivory, and other resources of the African interior to the bustling markets of Arabia, India, and beyond. Great Zimbabwe was an integral part of this trade network, especially because of its rich gold deposits. The kingdom's control over the trade of this precious metal made it an important partner for coastal traders, who would bring textiles, beads, and pottery in exchange for gold, ivory, and copper from the interior. The Swahili city-states, including Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar, became key commercial hubs, where goods from as far as China and India were traded alongside African products. These coastal cities were heavily influenced by Arab and Persian merchants, which led to the development of a cosmopolitan culture that blended African, Arab, and Persian influences. This cultural exchange not only enriched the Swahili coast, but also impacted the societies further inland, including Great Zimbabwe. While Great Zimbabwe itself was not a coastal city, its proximity to these trade routes ensured its success as a trading empire. The kingdom's prosperity was deeply tied to its ability to engage in commerce with these coastal city-states, which had access to a vast range of goods and cultures. The Swahili coast participation in the Indian Ocean trade brought new artistic traditions, religious practices, and even architectural ideas to Great Zimbabwe, influencing the kingdom's own cultural development. The trade routes that passed through Great Zimbabwe also helped to spread technologies such as metallurgy and pottery making, which were significant to both the Swahili city-states and the interior kingdoms of southern Africa. The exchange of goods, people, and ideas fostered a mutual dependence between the interior and coastal kingdoms, which shaped the history and development of both regions for centuries to come. The arrival of the Portuguese in the late 15th century marked a significant shift in the political and economic dynamics of the African interior and the Swahili coast. While Great Zimbabwe's decline had already begun by this time, the Portuguese presence in the region would contribute to the further fragmentation of the once dominant empire. Portuguese explorers, such as Vasco da Gama, made contact with the Swahili city-states in 1498, establishing trading relationships and eventually setting up forts along the East African coast. Their arrival marked the beginning of European colonial influence in the Indian Ocean trade network, which had long been dominated by African, Arab, and Asian merchants. The Portuguese sought to control the trade of gold, ivory, and other valuable commodities, and they used their naval power to assert dominance over the coastal trading routes. The Portuguese established a strong foothold in the region, particularly along the Swahili coast, where they built forts in cities like Mombasa and Kilwa. As the Portuguese expanded their influence, they began to disrupt the established trade routes that had been vital to the prosperity of Great Zimbabwe and its successor states, like Matapa. The Portuguese presence forced the African kingdoms to alter their trade patterns and adopt new strategies to maintain their economic and political power. In Matapa, the Portuguese initially sought to form alliances, offering military and economic support in exchange for control over the kingdom's gold mines. However, The relationship between the Portuguese and the Matapa Kingdom soured over time, leading to conflict and the eventual decline of Portuguese influence in the region. Despite these challenges, the Portuguese presence in the Indian Ocean trade network had a lasting impact on the region, altering the dynamics of commerce and politics. The arrival of the Portuguese also contributed to the spread of Christianity and European cultural practices in Africa. This period marked the beginning of European colonial expansion in Africa, which would continue for several centuries. The Portuguese presence in Africa is often seen as the precursor to the larger colonial scramble that would engulf much of the continent in the 19th century. The historical and cultural significance of Great Zimbabwe is profound, not only in understanding the legacy of African civilizations, but also in shaping modern African identity. In the post-colonial era, the study of Great Zimbabwe has contributed to the broader movement of reclaiming African history, which was often distorted or erased by colonial powers. The Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe, with its monumental stone structures, rich trade networks, and complex social and political systems, has become a symbol of Africa's deep and enduring historical roots. For centuries, colonial scholars and explorers disregarded or misrepresented the achievements of African civilizations. Many African societies were either ignored or depicted as primitive and uncivilized in contrast to European societies. The grandeur of Great Zimbabwe stood in stark contrast to these narratives, challenging the idea that Africa lacked sophisticated cultures and complex social systems. The rediscovery of Great Zimbabwe and the eventual recognition of its indigenous African roots have had a significant impact on how Africans, both on the continent and in the diaspora, view their history. The ruins of Great Zimbabwe have become a powerful symbol of pride and cultural identity for Zimbabweans and for Africans as a whole. As a testament to the accomplishments of pre-colonial African civilizations, Great Zimbabwe's legacy has provided a counter-narrative to the colonial history that often sought to diminish Africa's achievements. In Zimbabwe, the ruins have become a focal point of national pride and a symbol of the resilience of the African spirit. The significance of Great Zimbabwe is not just historical, but political, as the country's government has used the site to strengthen national unity and foster a sense of cultural continuity. The imagery of Great Zimbabwe is reflected in the country's national symbols, including its flag and currency, which feature elements inspired by the iconic Zimbabwe bird found at the Great Enclosure. By reclaiming the heritage of Great Zimbabwe, the people of Zimbabwe have been able to reaffirm their cultural identity and assert their place within a larger African historical context. Beyond Zimbabwe, the history of Great Zimbabwe has had a ripple effect on the broader African diaspora. African Americans and Afro-descendants in the Caribbean have embraced the history of Great Zimbabwe as part of their ancestral legacy. The kingdom's achievements in architecture, trade, and governance resonate with modern African diasporic communities who see themselves as descendants of a long history of powerful and sophisticated civilizations. This rediscovery has helped foster a sense of pride and unity among African-descended peoples worldwide, reinforcing the idea that their roots stretch back to some of the most advanced civilizations in world history. The study of Great Zimbabwe has played a pivotal role in the development of African historiography, which seeks to reinterpret and record the history of the African continent from African perspectives. The contributions of African scholars and historians have been instrumental in reshaping the narrative of Africa's past, moving away from the colonial view that saw Africa's history as inferior or non-existent before European intervention. Historically, African history was often written by colonial powers, and these accounts were shaped by the biases and limitations of imperialism. Colonial historians portrayed African societies as static and primitive, with little to no history of their own. The idea that African civilizations were inferior or backward became entrenched in academic circles, reinforcing the justification for colonial rule. Great Zimbabwe, like other African civilizations, was often dismissed or overlooked by European scholars. However, as African nations gained independence in the mid-20th century, a new generation of African scholars began to challenge these colonial narratives. The rediscovery of Great Zimbabwe's achievements, its architecture, social structure, and economic systems, became a focal point for African historians and archaeologists. The work of scholars such as Gertrude Thompson, who conducted excavations at the Great Zimbabwe site in the 1920s, was instrumental in disproving the colonial myth that the ruins were built by foreigners. By showing that Great Zimbabwe was an indigenous African creation, Thompson and other scholars helped to correct the historical record. The recognition of the site's African origins led to a broader reassessment of the capabilities and contributions of pre-colonial African societies. Today, African historiography emphasizes the agency of African peoples in shaping their own history, rejecting the notion that African civilizations were somehow inferior or dependent on foreign influence. What a journey we've just taken through the rise and fall of Great Zimbabwe, from its stunning stone structures to its powerful role in trade, culture, and politics. Through today's exploration, we've learned not only about the kingdom itself, but also about the profound lessons it offers for modern society. The moral of the story? Great Zimbabwe teaches us the importance of sustainable growth, the value of cultural heritage, and the resilience of civilizations in the face of external and internal challenges. It's a story of both triumph and caution, showing that even the most powerful empires can fall if they fail to adapt. Today, we've uncovered the true essence of a civilization that once flourished at the heart of Africa. From its forgotten decline to its rising prominence in modern historical thought, Great Zimbabwe remains a timeless testament to Africa's rich heritage. As we reflect on its legacy, let us remember that history is far more complex and powerful than we are often taught. Thank you for joining me here on History Teller YT. I hope this deep dive into Great Zimbabwe has sparked your curiosity and broadened your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe, as there are plenty more historical stories to uncover. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and come back soon to discover more untold histories that will shape our understanding of the world.